One of the challenges is to try and summarize or condense the context of the story, and it essentially is it's more than 1,000 years of Polish history that one has to try and condense. And Poland's borders have changed over the centuries, so I'm going to try and take a snapshot of the various borders of Poland, its Commonwealth, and when it disappeared off the map, and when it reappeared after the First World War. When Poland was established, or became a state in the year 966, this is more or less the borders in the year 1000, okay? And then Poland and Lithuania became a Commonwealth, and okay, I'll go through it, and then at the end of the 1700s disappeared off the map for 124 years. After the First World War, it reappeared, and this 1939, you can see the border of interwar Poland before the Second World War, and in pink is the current boundaries of Poland. The family ancestral hometown is Huszatyn, is right there. I'm trying to find the archive material, but it looks like the Szewczuk family has been there since before the partitions. So, okay, it's a messy, but should give you some idea of the complexity of Polish history. My presentation is an extract from my research project, which is entitled Victims of Communism, A History of the Polish Children of Oudtshoorn, South Africa during and after World War II. Now, my research project was inspired by two of many books, and one of them is Jochen Lingelbach's On the Edges of Whiteness, Polish Refugees in British Colonial Africa during and after the Second World War, and focuses on the Polish refugees camps in Uganda, Kenya, Tanganyika, Northern and Southern Rhodesia. And Lingelbach discusses the humanity shown by the Polish refugees towards the African hosting communities and the willingness to engage and interact with the African hosts. Now, Lingelbach argues that, and I think this is what I highlighted in bold, you should take note of, that the Polish refugees' encounters with Africans might have helped to facilitate the downfall of a carefully constructed image of a supposedly white superiority that British colonial rulers and their settlers tried so anxiously to keep up. The British colonialists, they wanted to keep the Poles and the Africans separate, but the Poles reckoned, but these are lovely people, we're going to talk to them, we're going to socialize, deal with it. And then the other book, and I think the chair should take note of this other title of this book, is The Italian Diaspora in South Africa, Nostalgia, Identity and Belonging in the Second and Third Generations by Maria Chiara Marchetti Mercer and Anita Verger. They're two academics at WITS. All right, now the background to the scope of research is that the Polish government in exile in London, represented in South Africa by the Consul General Dr. Stanisław Łebkowski, entered into negotiations with the Smuts government that resulted in an agreement being reached for 500 Polish children and their caregivers to find safety and refuge in Oudtshoorn. So on the 10th of April 1943, 500 children and their caregivers arrived in the Oudtshoorn Children's Home after surviving being deported to the Siberia by the Russian NKVD. Now, the primary objective of my research is to document the untold lived experiences of the Oudtshoorn children in their deportations, to Siberia, their journey out of Siberia to Persia, then on to Oudtshoorn, and subsequently their lives into South Africa. The experiences of dislocation, rupture, loss, and reconstitution later in life. All right. Okay. I'm not going to go through this whole lot, but essentially, in my research proposal, I did quite an extensive literature review. WITS History Department, they want a proposal of 11,000 words. My literature review was 11,000 words. So, what you should take note of is that the one part I covered was Kresy, a history and its traditions. Narratives of the deportations within the context of Poland's national narrative, and immigration to South Africa in the 20th century, and I think what is significant in our lives, and particularly the subsequent generations, post-traumatic growth and search for lost family and community narratives. All right, what I thought I'd do is just list my primary sources. These are from various archives, and I have 3,660 pages of primary archives, and then a large selection of photographs, and I've created folders for each Oudtshoorn refugee, child and caregiver that I have information on, and that's 98 folders. And the contents of these folders contain detailed material that includes oral interviews, written testimonies, and collated correspondence. Many of the folders just contain minimal information. Now, the oral interviews with the Oudtshoorn children and the subsequent generations have been disappointing. The Oudtshoorn children and the subsequent, in fact, they're looking for themselves, the second generation's information on their parents. The parents, it's a case of, yeah, I remember vaguely this, that, and whatever. So, but I've categorized the 98 folders into 3 broad categories: written testimonies, written reflections, and then the rest with minimal information. Okay, and then we have our annual conference, the South Africa-Poland Heritage Conference, and we have recorded conversations with the children, the second generation and the third, and then I have a very extensive list of secondary sources. All right, now going back in history. The evolution of Polish culture, heritage, and identity. Now, on April the 14th, 966, Mieszko I, who was the chief of the Polans, was baptized into Christianity, and Poland achieved statehood and earning the recognition of other European kingdoms. Now, Christianity became the bedrock on which Polish culture, heritage, and identity was built on. And then Vincenzi Kołobrzeg, he wrote his book, The Chronicles of Poland, and consequently is considered the father of Polish culture and identity. And Kołobrzeg's literary output relates to the theories of values and virtues, and they play a huge role in Polish thinking and philosophy and enlightenment. So his literary output influenced the value systems adopted by Poland's elected monarchies. The creation of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth was triggered by the military threat of the expansionist and imperialist Grand Duchy of Moscow onto the eastern flank of Lithuania. The Union of Lublin was signed on the 1st of July 1589, resulting in a single republic. Now, this Commonwealth was characterized by an elective monarchy, and then the broad-based nobility, the Szlachta, voted for a new monarch on the death of a monarch. Now, the Szlachta, as a class, differed significantly from the feudal nobility of Western Europe, and there's the details in terms of what the Szlachta did in terms of the legislative, and essentially they've evolved the same, which is the Polish Parliament as well as a Senate. And I think membership of the Szlachta grew to about 15% of the Polish-Lithuanian society, and was much larger than the noble classes of other countries, typically comprising 1%. Despite enormous differences in wealth and political influence, few distinctions in law existed between the great magnates and the lesser Szlachta. Unlike absolute monarchs who eventually took reign in most other European countries, the Polish king was not an autocrat and not the Szlachta's overlord. Okay, continuous enlightened thinking and protection for religious and ethnic diversity. The tolerant Commonwealth fostered new ideas in culture, literature, and science. Now, in the Kresy, that's the interface, the borderlands, as it were, between Poland and Lithuania, there was a diverse range of ethnic groups that had to learn to coexist. And then also a diverse range of religious groups based on Western Christianity, Eastern Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. And historian Felix Gross argues that the realities in the region favored the development of a tradition of toleration as a favorable option for survival. Now think about what I mentioned about that book from Jochen Lingelbach. Now, the Jews suffered massive pogroms in Western Europe, And then King Kazimierz the Great, he invited the Jews to settle in the Commonwealth, where they found safety and refuge. And under the decree of the General Charter of Jewish Liberties, Jewish safety and religious freedom was guaranteed under the direct protection of the monarchs, in contrast to the pogroms faced by the Jews in Western Europe. Furthermore, and then overwhelmed by the horrors of the 1572 St. Bartholomew's Day massacre in France of Protestants by Catholics, the Parliament, signed the Warsaw Confederation on January the 28th, 1573. This act granted religious tolerance to nobility and free persons within a dominant Catholic Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth and protected all non-Catholic denominations without exception. Under the rule of law, all citizens in the Commonwealth were considered equal. Okay, now the Commonwealth's fortunes were waxed and waned, and through internal divisions influenced by foreign interests, the Commonwealth lost its strength. Now, King Stanisław II August Poniatowski attempted to re-strengthen the Commonwealth by formulating the Constitution of the 3rd of May in 1791, and is the highlight of 18th century constitutional history. The Poles who wrote this constitution also helped write the American Constitution, which is the world's first modern constitution. Now, the liberum veto was abolished, majority rule was introduced, and personal freedoms was guaranteed. Now, the liberum veto was, if anybody in the Schlachter said, I object, then that's it. That's the end of proceedings. And then external influences, like from, the Schlachter were influenced by external people to make use of the liberum veto. However, such reforms were not welcomed by the Commonwealth's autocratic, expansionist, and imperial neighbors who wanted to maintain the subjugation of the peoples. To ensure that democratic principles and ideas do not find root in their respective empires, Russia, Prussia, and Austria undertook the 3 partitions of Poland, and with the 3rd partition of 24th of October 1795, the independent state of Poland ceased to exist. Thus began the colonization, oppression, depolonization of Poland, destruction of Poland's languages, culture, heritage, and enlightened achievements. Russia's primary objective was the complete Russification of Poland. And the 3 occupiers and oppressors used every method to hinder economic development of the respective portions of Poland. The Poles then became the revolutionaries and freedom fighters of the 19th century, as a desire for freedom and liberty became one of the defining cornerstones of Polish Romanticism. Okay, and here's a cartoon of King Poniatowski, and there's Catherine the Great of Russia, Frederick II of Prussia, and Joseph II of Austria agreeing to divide Poland with the tacit consent of the Sultan Mustafa III. King George III of Britain is sleeping in the background, and then you have the other monarchs overlooking the whole thing as well. So, yeah, life happens. Anyway, so this is the map of Europe just before the First World War. So here you'll see the boundary of the Russian Empire. Poland had been partitioned Germany had become unified, and that's Germany, Austria, and then over there is the Szewczuk family hometown. So if you look at the Russian Empire, it includes Finland and so on, and Putin wants to reconstitute this, if not also the Soviet Empire. He's not going to do it. He's not going to do it. Even if Trump wins, he's not going to do it. Anyway, let me not get too excited about that. Okay, so this should give you some idea of what the European map looked like before the First World War. All right, so after the emergence of Poland as a nation state after World War I, its eastern boundary was yet to be defined. And Poland and Bolshevik Russia fought an undeclared war over this territory, primarily over the Kresy, in the 1919-1921 Polish-Bolshevik War. Poland was victorious in this war, and Poland's eastern boundary was agreed to by the Treaty of Riga. And the Kresy re-emerged after 149 years of partitions. Now, Lenin and Stalin were humiliated and angered by this victory. Historians Norman Davies and Stephen Brown both argue that this humiliation laid the foundation for Stalin seeking revenge and reprisals against the Polish state and its peoples. Now, the Polish soldiers who took part in that Polish Bolshevik war, like my grandfather, and the families were targeted by Stalin for revenge and formed the core of the Polish citizens who were deported to Siberia. Now, I mean, there's any number of war crimes that Stalin committed, but I think one that impacted, let's say, Poles directly because of the agreeing on the eastern border was Stalin signed order number 00485 that provided for the arrest of the minority Poles living in the Soviet Union and punishing them. Shot, and an unknown number were deported to Siberia. And okay, this is what the map looks like when on the 23rd of August 1939, Russia and Germany signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Non-Aggression Pact. This pact divided Central and East Europe into respective spheres of influence, and Kresy was included in the Russian sphere of influence. Russia was hoping to regain Finland, okay, the Baltic states, and then, all right, so this is the 1939, and then after, a year later, this is what the boundaries looked like. Now, so on the 1st of September 1939, Germany invaded Poland from the west, and on the 17th of September, Russia invaded Poland from the east, annexing the Kresy. The Baltic states simply capitulated and were occupied by Russia. However, the Finns, they decided, no, we're not going to take this lying down. So the Winter War started, and the Finns countered with fierce resistance, and on the 12th of March 1940, Finland and Russia signed a peace treaty. Okay, Finland ceded some territory in exchange to maintain their independence. And the Finns held off the Russians for 105 days and suffered 70,000 casualties compared to the Russian 323,000. Now, if you follow what's happening in Ukraine, there's just meat waves after meat wave. And I think the Russian losses are, okay, what they call coming off the battlefield, you know, there's killed and injured. It's approaching 700,000. That's another story. All right, so the fourth partition of Poland. So, so this is what Poland looked like after Russia and Germany invaded Poland. And essentially, this region over here includes the Kresy. This is sort of like where my family comes from. Poland was then subjected to new crimes against humanity, genocide. And at the end of World War II, Russia imposed an illegal and illegitimate totalitarian and autocratic communist regime into Poland. In 1989, World War II finally ended for Poland, as well as the rest of Eastern Europe, with the collapse of Russian-imposed communism and the withdrawal of the last Russian troops from Poland. Russian-imposed war traumas are now being exposed and being remembered, and that's part of one of my areas of interest. All right, on the signed order of Stalin, 14,500 military officers and over 7,000 other Polish citizens, elite, were rounded up and executed in various locations and is known as the Katyn Forest massacres. And Stalin's plan was to move communism as far west as possible and to use the land acquired for his Soviet people. Poles were not part of this plan, and Stalin ordered the deportations of Poles from the Kresy to the gulags of Siberia. 1.7 million Poles were deported in overcrowded cattle cars. And in her extensive research, historian Anne Applebaum concluded that that Stalin had deported 42 different ethnic groups into the gulags of Siberia. And this is on the left is the signed copy of Stalin agreeing to execute the the Polish citizens at the Katyn Forest massacres. All right, so already, cartoonists were wondering, okay, how long will this romance last? And then on 22nd of June 1941, Germany attacked the Soviet Union via Russian-occupied Poland. And in his research, historian Norman Davis concluded that by this period, 700,000 Poles had perished in Siberia, succumbing to the extreme cold, illness, starvation, etc. And the Western allies of Churchill and Roosevelt were confronted by the reality of a new political ally in Stalin. And Churchill facilitated contact between the Polish government in exile in London and the Soviet authorities in Moscow, and this resulted in the signing of the Sikorsky-Maisky Agreement. The primary terms of this agreement were that Moscow recognized that its 23rd August 1939 pact with Germany had lost its validity. The Polish government in exile declared that Poland was not bound by any agreement with any other third power directed against the USSR, and diplomatic relations were to be restored with the two governments exchanging ambassadors. And the two states pledged to aid each other in the war against Germany. Also in the agreement was a Polish army would be formed on the Soviet soil based on the Siberian deportees. And then a so-called amnesty is to be granted to all Polish citizens now detained in Soviet territory. In organizing the Polish army in Soviet territory, Sikorsky, who was leader of the Polish government in exile, said to Stalin, but listen, where are the 14,500 Polish military officers that were taken as POW? Stalin thought, no, they're safe, they're in Manchuria, blah, 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 blah. Then on the 12th of April 1943, Germany announced the discovery of the mass graves of the Polish officers executed in Katyn. And Sikorsky insisted on an independent investigation by the International Red Cross. Now, this led to the Soviet foreign minister informing the Polish ambassador to Moscow that the Soviet government they were offended by these accusations and decided to suspend relations with the Polish government. Molotov further informed the foreign minister that the release of Polish citizens in the Soviet Union will be stopped. And at this point, 115,000 Poles managed to escape the Soviet Union. Of these, 18,300 were children. All right, so long story short, 16,000 children and their caregivers were sent to various refugee camps in Africa, Uganda, Tanganyika, northern and southern Rhodesia. And these are the various camps in Africa, East Africa. And essentially, Jochen Lungelbach wrote about these camps. The Polish children, as I've mentioned before, arrived in Oudtshoorn on the 10th of April 1943. And they were housed in the modified military camp in Oudtshoorn for what people thought their temporary accommodation, care, and education, with the thought that, okay, after the war, we're all going to go back. All right, now, this is work in progress, so I'm going to give you some preliminary results. And looking at some of the primary sources, now, the Consul General, Dr. Stanislav Lemkowski, he initiated the Polish Relief Fund, and he collected money through regular street collections in Cape Town. I don't remember those little boxes, Well, the Cape Townians were extremely generous, as well as other South Africans. And the money was used to purchase the comforts for passing troops. That's another story in itself. And this money was used to purchase 40,000 meters, 40 kilometers of white linen from India to make garments for the children refugees in Tehran. And also the purchase of clothing for children in Lusaka, stationery for schools in East Africa, and the supply of clothing and sweets to the children in Oudtshoorn. And purchase of socks, blah, 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 etc. Now, in 1945, the then director of the Children's Home, Dr. Zygmunt Skowroński, he initiated the Warsaw Relief Fund. And teacher Elżbieta Maseira taught the girls needlework and embroidery in style of different regions of Poland. This embroidery work was extremely popular and were good sellers, and on the right you can see pictures of the embroidery work. So these are some of the experiences in Siberia, and a common thread is the traumatic memory of being woken up in the middle of the night and the NKVD, the Russian secret police, opening the doors and barging in and telling the people, listen, you got 10 minutes to pack, you're going. And some people had the presence of mind to pack valuable items such as sewing machines, property title deeds, valuables that the soldiers did not steal. My paternal grandfather even packed potato seeds. Another common memory is the being forced into dark, overcrowded train wagons, and what was a characteristic of these cattle cars, there was a hole in the middle for ablutions, and that was pretty embarrassing. So a person who had to use the toilet, they put blankets around them. And one of I don't think we quite understand the cold that's in Siberia, and some of the people that were forced against the side of the cattle cars, the cold permeated, and essentially they were impacted with serious ailments. Also, what the children expressed is the brutal, oppressive nature of the occupation of the Kresy by Russian soldiers. Children reported the mix of awe and resentment of the Russian soldiers upon entering a land of relative material and cultural advancement and sophistication. And a common thread focuses upon the abrupt, brutal, and terrifying ordeal of deportation and resettlement in Siberia. The children provide graphic descriptions of the incredible suffering and deprivation they faced. The horrific conditions endured were compounded by the open ethnic bias displayed towards the Poles by the captors. You look at what's happening in Ukraine. This is being repeated by Russia onto Ukraine. Putin is a war criminal. He's been charged by the International Criminal Court for deporting Ukrainian children. Nothing changes with Russia. One of the things I was looking at is the development of familial ties and networks to reconstitute the economic and social lives after their rupture and displacement. And so you have Dr. Zygmunt Skowroński, Elżbieta Masejada, and they laid the foundation to create familial bonds. These are first generationers. There was a reunion in approximately 1960. And then us, the second generationers, are continuing with the establishment of familial bonds and trying to further maintaining our identity in South Africa. Polish migration to South Africa started with the voyages of discovery, Portuguese voyages of discovery. And Poles and the Dutch East India Company had good economic relations, and many Poles worked for the VOC. After their contracts, many decided to stay in South Africa and left their mark behind in terms of some of the well-known names. Like, for instance, Roos and Meyer are two examples of some of the names. And if you go to the archives in Cape Town, you can see, where your forefathers are. So the chances are very good that, okay, it's not as probably as prominent as Dutch, German, or French, but the Afrikaner is bound to have a few drops of Polish blood in them. All right, this is just an extensive list of some of the names. I'm not going to read them out. And then, okay, I just want to end off on this. So one of the things we're working on is the Oudtshoorn Polish Heritage Trail. And there's a whole bunch of physical elements. And in September 2023, whilst commemorating the 80th anniversary of the arrival of the Polish children, we took this picture in front of a memorial that is now currently under construction. This is on the left, you'll see the concept of the memorial, and on the right is the 3D figures that to be machined. This is the largest granite 3D piece manufactured or machined in South Africa. We also believe it's the largest in the world. We are hoping that this will be completed by the end of November. I just want to mention two things in my concluding remarks, and that the Kresy is the birthplace of two Polish lawyers who had a large influence on international criminal law. Raphael Lemkin, who coined the word genocide, and through his efforts, the United Nations General Assembly now recognizes genocide and crimes against humanity and war crimes as legitimate crimes under international criminal law. Now, Roman Chrba, a Polish lawyer, who through his efforts found that, okay, deportations and denationalization, think about the current Ukrainian children, is recognized by the United Nations General Assembly as a crime of genocide and is not subject to the statute of limitations. That's the important thing. So hopefully what the children of Oudtshoorn went through will be addressed at the International Criminal Court. Thank you.